Welcome to People of the Book, where we walk through Black history not as tragedy, but as testimony. Here, we do not speak of chains to glorify pain, but to reveal how Allah transforms suffering into strength. Every name we carry, every land we uncover, is a reminder that the descendants of the enslaved were never forgotten by their Creator. This is the story of the scattered made whole again, of a people whose light was buried beneath centuries of conquest, yet still burns through faith, intellect, and endurance. For Black excellence is not the invention of modern pride, it is the continuation of divine decree, the echo of prophets, poets, warriors, and believers who walked the earth before colonizers learned its shape. And among those chosen to remember was George Washington Williams, a soldier, a scholar, and a man of God, sent not to take from Africa, but to return what had been stolen, her truth. In him, Allah showed that the diaspora's story is not one of loss, but of return, that from the plantations of America to the rivers of the Congo, His mercy runs unbroken. For when Allah remembers a people, He raises witnesses from among them, souls who rise in the ruins of empire to remind the world, you can bury history, but you cannot bury truth. Before his first cry touched the air, the land itself was trembling with contradiction. It was America in the mid-1800s, a nation draped in freedom's flag, yet built upon the backs of the bound. Factories roared, churches sang, and railroads carved through green hills. But beneath the hymns was the hum of injustice, the sound of men buying and selling souls. In Pennsylvania, the soil carried both promise and pain. It was a free state by law, but not by heart. Runaway slaves passed quietly through its forests on their way north, whispering prayers into the night. Some towns hid them, others hunted them. A nation split between mercy and malice, each claiming righteousness. And in that place of tension, between the shackled and the liberated, between hypocrisy and hope, Allah chose to send forth a soul who would speak for the silenced. For every era has its appointed witness, and this one was born beneath a decree older than his country, to remember what the world forgets, to stand where others tremble, to write what the powerful refuse to read, to stand where others tremble. He entered the world in 1849, in the shadow of war and awakening, a Black child in a land still learning what freedom meant, a seed planted in conflict but destined for clarity. His birth was not coincidence, it was calibration. Allah had measured the hour, the family, the struggle, and the soil, and declared, "From this place, truth shall rise." His name was George Washington Williams. He grew up in a world that measured worth by skin and silence. His childhood was not wrapped in comfort, but in contradiction. He was free by law, yet bound by the shadows of those who were not. In the marketplaces, he heard whispers of men bought and sold. In church halls, he heard sermons on liberty that excluded faces like his. Everywhere he turned, freedom was preached but not practiced. And even as a boy, he felt something inside him revolt against the hypocrisy. That revolt was not rebellion, it was revelation. It was Allah awakening in him the instinct for justice, the same instinct that stirred Moses before he ever confronted Pharaoh. He began to study scripture, language, and history, searching for proof that a man like him could matter in a world that denied his existence. But it wasn't books that gave him purpose. It was burden. He saw mothers weep for sons sold away, and fathers kneel in silence because their prayers felt unanswered. The weight of it all pressed on his spirit, shaping him into something rare, a soul whose compassion burned hotter than his anger. When the Civil War broke out in 1861, he was only 16, too young to carry the world's pain, yet too awake to ignore it. The call for soldiers rang through the land like a storm, and to many it was politics, but to him it was prophecy. He saw it not as a war of blue and gray, but as the moment Allah had written for the sons of the enslaved to reclaim their dignity. He was 16, an age when most boys dream, but Allah had written fire in his veins instead. The nation was unraveling. Neighbors turned into enemies. Church bells rang over cries for war, and the air smelled of iron and fear. To the world, it was politics. To heaven, it was judgment. The Civil War had begun, not just a clash of armies, but a reckoning between truth and falsehood. And in that hour, Allah called forth the sons of the enslaved to fight for the freedom their ancestors had prayed for in chains. He watched men march to drums that once silenced his people, watched flags wave that once denied his worth. Yet something in him stirred, a courage older than the land itself, the same courage that once moved through prophets and kings. He looked upon the battlefield and did not see glory. He saw destiny. He knew some fights are written in the heavens long before men name their sides. Across those same fields stood Stanley. For Stanley, the war was survival, a fight to keep the system that chained others. For Williams, it was salvation, a chance to break those chains forever. Yet even then, Allah was weaving their stories together in the unseen. Two men who would one day walk the same soil across seas, one blinded by ambition, the other guided by faith. They knew not what Allah knew. He joined the Union Army, the 6th U.S. Colored Troops Regiment, a boy standing among men who had once been property. Their hearts pounded not just with fear, but with divine adrenaline, each heartbeat saying, "This is for my people," not questioning what part of Africa each brother came from, only knowing they shared the same pain and the same hope. Freedom. They fought with no promise of reward, no guarantee of remembrance, but with faith that if they died that day, Allah Himself would remember their names. Bullets tore through the air, and through it all, he felt not terror, but purpose. It was the same fire that once moved through Tariq ibn Ziyad when he burned his ships upon the shore, telling his soldiers, "Behind you is the sea, before you is the enemy. There is no return, but victory." That spirit lived again on this soil, generations later, reborn in sons of the enslaved who refused to retreat. For once, he was not running from history, he was running into it. When the war ended, silence fell over the land, but not over his soul. He had seen too much to return to ordinary life. The gunfire stopped, yet something inside him still marched. Victory had come, but it didn't feel like freedom, not when the faces of his people still carried the same weariness, not when liberty was spoken like a promise, but lived like a privilege. He wandered through a country still bleeding from its own hypocrisy, searching for meaning beyond its borders. Allah had not placed that fire in him to let it die in peace. It was meant to burn through illusion and carry him into new lands. So when word reached him of another battle, not in America, but in Mexico, he listened. There, too, men were fighting an empire. There, too, freedom had a price. The French had crossed the ocean under Napoleon III, installing a foreign emperor named Maximilian to rule over a land that had already fought for its independence. And on the other side stood Benito Juarez, an indigenous man who refused to bow, who declared that Mexico would never serve another crown. William saw in Juarez a reflection of his own people's struggle, dark skin defying white thrones, a native son standing firm where history said he should kneel. The cause was the same, only the soil was different. He crossed the border not as a soldier of fortune, but as a soldier of conviction. For him, every war for the oppressed was one war, every fight against empire a continuation of the same divine story. The Quran says, "And we desired to show favor to those who were oppressed in the land, and to make them leaders and inheritors." 28:5. Mexico was a land caught between empires, rich in soil, torn in spirit. French troops in polished uniforms marched under foreign banners, and yet the land itself refused to bow. The mountains carried the voices of the old gods, and the rivers whispered of men who would rather die than serve another crown. Williams arrived not as a conqueror, but as a witness to that defiance. He fought beside men whose ancestors had built pyramids before Europe built its palaces, men who prayed in their own tongues, but shared the same fire that once burned in his. He watched as the French-backed Emperor Maximilian tried to rule through kindness while his soldiers ruled through blood. Villages burned in the name of order, and fields turned red under the weight of empire's arrogance. Williams had seen this pattern before, only the flag had changed. In the nights between battles, he thought of America and of those who still walked in chains. The struggle was the same, only dressed in a different language. He began to see the truth of Allah's decree. Tyranny wears many faces, but its fall is always written. When the French finally retreated and Maximilian was captured, William stood among the survivors and heard Benito Juarez speak the words that echoed through time. Mexico does not need emperors. It struck him like revelation. Freedom, he realized, is not the absence of rulers. It is the remembrance of who truly rules. When the dust of Mexico settled, Williams returned home, but he was not the same man who had left. He had walked through fire on 2 continents and seen the same truth written twice. When men forget God, they build empires. When they remember Him, they build nations. The war had sharpened his courage, but it was wisdom that Allah was calling forth next. His hands had carried rifles. Now they would carry books. The same zeal that once drove him into battle now drove him into knowledge, because the truest revolution begins in the mind. He studied theology and law, first to understand justice, then to become it. He believed freedom without faith was an illusion, and that no nation could rise higher than the moral character of its people. In every sermon he read, in every scripture he studied, he looked for the same question that haunted him. How does a people heal after surviving hell? He began to write, not as a historian seeking fame, but as a man seeking meaning. He saw the pen as a sacred instrument, one that could testify where the body could not. And in that conviction, Allah opened a new path, one that would lead him far from the church stage and deep into the heart of Africa. He could not know it yet, but the same God who once carried him across battlefields was now preparing him for a different kind of war. One fought not with bullets, but with truth. By the 1880s, his sword had become a pen, and with it, he began to write what the world refused to remember. America called itself free, yet its history spoke in chains. The textbooks praised generals and presidents, but never the people whose labor built the land. Williams saw what others ignored, that the true story of civilization had been fractured, its African roots buried beneath European pride. So he began his life's great work, the history of the Negro race in America. But he didn't start with America. He began with Adam. To some it seemed strange. Why trace the black race all the way back to the first man? But to him, it was divine logic. If all men were created from one soul, then the story of the Negro was not a footnote. It was the beginning. He wrote, "While I am a believer in the Holy Bible, it is not the best authority on ethnology. Whatever science has added, I have gladly appropriated." Through those words, you can hear a man trying to reconcile faith and fact, scripture and science, to reclaim dignity without rejecting God. He was telling the world, we were there from the beginning. We were part of creation's plan, not the world's afterthought. His book became more than history. It was healing in written form. He spoke of Egypt's African founders, of Ethiopia's empires, of civilizations erased by ignorance, yet preserved by divine will. Every page was a counterweight to centuries of lies. And though he used the language of his time, the Bible, ethnology, and civilization, his mission was timeless. He was doing what every prophet and reformer had done before him, restoring truth where arrogance had rewritten it. He reminded a weary people that they were not cursed, they were chosen, that their skin was not punishment, but proof of divine craftsmanship. And though he did not yet know it, his book would soon carry him back to the very continent whose name filled its pages, Africa. As his words reached readers across the Atlantic, William's curiosity began to turn toward Africa itself, the land he had defended on paper but never yet touched with his feet. Reports from explorers filled newspapers, and none inspired him more than those of Henry Morton Stanley, whose writings he read with awe. To Williams, Stanley's journeys across the dark continent appeared as noble crusades of discovery and endurance. He wept at the loyalty of the African men who carried Stanley's burdens, calling them heroes, whose faith and courage deserved to be known by name. In Stanley, he thought he saw proof that collaboration between Black strength and Western science could heal the wounds of slavery. So when word spread that King Leopold of Belgium was inviting educated Black Americans to help civilize the Congo, Williams saw an opportunity shaped by destiny. He imagined young men from the freed race traveling to Africa, not in chains this time, but as teachers, engineers, and missionaries of progress. He believed they could rebuild the continent with knowledge instead of war, light instead of bondage. What he didn't yet know was that the offer itself was a mirage, that behind the promise of partnership lay a machinery of deceit. But Allah allows even illusions to serve his purpose. That dream would lead Williams exactly where he needed to go, into the heart of the Congo, where truth awaited him like a buried flame ready to ignite. When Williams finally set foot in the Congo in 1890, it was not discovery that greeted him, it was deception. The air was thick with humidity and silence. But beneath it, he felt something heavier, sorrow. He had come expecting a land alive with promise, where free Black men could serve as architects of a new Africa. Instead, he found chains both visible and invisible, iron shackles for those who resisted, and invisible chains for those who obeyed out of fear. A people beaten in the name of civilization and ruled by the ghost of Leopold's deceit. The villages were hollowed. The men walked with their eyes lowered. The women carried fear in their silence. Belgian officers spoke of progress, but the ground was soaked with exhaustion. What Stanley had called roads were trails paved by forced labor. What Leopold called stations were prisons for the living. Every treaty was a trick, words signed by hands that could not read, binding souls to work until their bodies gave out. William's heart broke as he walked through it. He had believed he was walking into opportunity. Now he realized he was walking through a graveyard built by lies. The same Africans he once praised in Stanley's books, the loyal porters, the brave guides, the faithful souls, were now reduced to silence under the same flag Stanley helped raise. And there, amid the wailing of the voiceless, something in him shattered. He saw the truth not as a journalist or a scholar, but as a son, a descendant of the enslaved, standing in the aftermath of his ancestors' betrayal. He could feel the bloodline of his people tremble beneath his feet. Every face he passed seemed to ask him the same question without words. Will you turn away too? He could have. He could have gone home, written politely, spoken carefully. But the same fire that had led him into battle as a boy now burned through his pen, not as rage alone, but as divine outrage. The sorrow he felt was not merely human grief. It was the grief of God's earth, crying out from beneath the weight of men who claimed to rule in his name. Williams realized he had not come to Congo by chance. He had been summoned. Every step of his life, every sermon, every wound, every word, had been preparing him for this confrontation. This was not coincidence. It was decree. Allah had written for him to see with his own eyes, to feel with his own heart, and to speak with the authority of truth. And so, with trembling hands and eyes that refused to look away, he began to write. Not a report, but a reckoning. He poured into his letter every injustice, every betrayal, every scream the world refused to hear. His words were not ink, they were blood. They were the cry of a man who loved both Africa and God, too deeply to let either be profaned. He wrote that what he saw was not civilization, but corruption, not progress, but a plague of greed. And when he finished, he did not write to comfort a king. He wrote to confront one. He sent his letter directly to King Leopold II, the man whose empire had baptized cruelty in the name of Christianity. It was not just a letter. It was a mirror, one that forced Europe to see what it had become, and it began like this. An open letter to His Serene Majesty, Leopold II, King of the Belgians and Sovereign of the Independent State of Congo, by Colonel the Honorable George W. Williams, of the United States of America. Good and great friend, I have the honor to submit for your Majesty's consideration some reflections respecting the independent state of Congo, based upon a careful study and inspection of the country, and character of the personal government you have established upon the African continent. In order that you may know the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, I implore your most gracious permission to address you without restraint, and with the frankness of a man who feels that he has a duty to perform to history, humanity, civilization, and to the Supreme Being, who is himself the King of Kings. Your Majesty will testify to my affection for your person and friendship for your African state, of which you have had ample practical proofs for nearly 6 years. My friendship and service for the state of Congo were inspired by and based upon your publicly declared motives and aims, and your personal statement to your humble subscriber. Humane sentiments and work of Christian civilization for Africa. Thus I was led to regard your enterprise as the rising of the star of hope for the dark continent, so long the habitation of cruelties, and I journeyed in its light and labored in its hope. All the praiseful things I have spoken and written of the Congo country, state and sovereign, was inspired by the firm belief that your government was built upon the enduring foundation of truth, liberty, humanity, and justice. It afforded me great pleasure to avail myself of the opportunity afforded me last year of visiting your state in Africa, and how thoroughly I have been disenchanted, disappointed, and disheartened. It is now my painful duty to make known to your Majesty, in plain but respectful language, every charge which I am about to bring against. Your Majesty's personal government in the Congo has been carefully investigated. A list of competent and veracious witnesses, documents, letters, official records, and data has been faithfully prepared, which will be deposited with Her Britannic Majesty's Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs until such time as an international commission can be created with power to send for persons and papers, to administer oaths, and attest the truth or falsity of these charges. I crave your Majesty's indulgence while I make a few preliminary remarks before entering upon the specifications and charges. Your Majesty's title to the territory of the State of Congo is badly clouded, while many of the treaties made with the natives by the Association Internationale du Congo, of which you were director and banker, were tainted by frauds of the grossest character. The world may not be surprised to learn that your flag floats over territory to which your Majesty has no legal or just claim, since other European powers have doubtful claims to the territory which they occupy upon the African continent. But all honest people will be shocked to know by what groveling means this fraud was consummated. There were instances in which Mr. Henry M. Stanley sent one white man with 4 or 5 Zanzibar soldiers to make treaties with native chiefs. The staple argument was that the white man's heart had grown sick of the wars and rumors of war between one chief and another, between one village and another, that the white man was at peace with his black brother and desired to confederate all African tribes for the general defense and public welfare. All the sleight-of-hand tricks had been carefully rehearsed, and he was now ready for his work. A number of electric batteries had been purchased in London, and when attached to the arm under the coat, communicated with a band of ribbon, which passed over the palm of the white brother's hand. And when he gave the black brother a cordial grasp of the hand, the black brother was greatly surprised to find his white brother so strong that he nearly knocked him off his feet in giving him the hand of fellowship. When the native inquired about the disparity of strength between himself and his white brother, he was told that the white man could pull up trees and perform the most prodigious feats of strength. Next came the Lens Act. The white brother took from his pocket a cigar, carelessly bit off the end, held up his glass to the sun, and complacently smoked his cigar, to the great amazement and terror of his black brother. The white man explained his intimate relation to the sun, and declared that if he were to request him to burn up his black brother's village, it would be done. The third act was the gun trick. The white man took a percussion cap gun, tore the end of the paper which held the powder to the bullet, and poured the powder and paper into the gun, at the same time slipping the bullet into the sleeve of the left arm. A cap was placed upon the nipple of the gun, and the black brother was implored to step off 10 yards and shoot at his white brother to demonstrate his statement that he was a spirit, and therefore could not be killed. After much begging, the black brother aims the gun at his white brother, pulls the trigger, the gun is discharged, the white man stoops, and takes the bullet from his shoe. By such means as these, too silly and disgusting to mention, and a few boxes of gin, whole villages have been signed away to your Majesty. In your personal letter to the President of the Republic of the United States of America, bearing date of August 1st, 1885, you said that the possessions of the International Association of the Congo will hereafter form the independent state of the Congo. I have at the same time the honor to inform you and the government of the Republic of the United States of America that, authorized by the Belgian legislative chambers to become the chief of the new state, I have taken, in accord with the association, the title of Sovereign of the Independent State of Congo. Thus you assume the headship of the State of Congo, and at once organized a personal government. You have named its officers, created its laws, furnished its finances, and every act of the government has been clothed with the majesty of your authority. On the 25th of February, 1884, a gentleman who has sustained an intimate relation to your Majesty for many years, and who then wrote as expressing your sentiments, addressed a letter to the United States in which the following language occurs. It may be safely asserted that no barbarous people have ever so readily adopted the fostering care of benevolent enterprise, as have the tribes of the Congo, and never was there a more honest and practical effort made to increase their knowledge and secure their welfare. The letter from which the above is an excerpt was written for the purpose of securing the friendly action of the Committee on Foreign Relations, which had under consideration a Senate resolution in which the United States recognized the flag of the Association Internationale du Congo as the flag of a friendly government. The letter was influential because it was supposed to contain the truth respecting the natives and the program, not only of the association, but of the new state, its legitimate successor, and of your Majesty. When I arrived in the Congo, I naturally sought for the results of the brilliant program: fostering care, benevolent enterprise, and honest and practical effort, to increase the knowledge of the natives and secure their welfare. I had never been able to conceive of Europeans establishing a government in a tropical country without building a hospital. And yet, from the mouth of the Congo River to its headwaters, here at the Seventh Cataract, a distance of 1,448 miles, there is not a solitary hospital for Europeans, and only 3 sheds for sick Africans in the service of the state, not fit to be occupied by a horse. 6 sailors frequently die on board their vessels at Banana Point, and if it were not for the humanity of the Dutch Trading Company at that place, who have often opened their private hospital to the sick of other countries, many more might die. There is not a single chaplain in the employ of your Majesty's government to console the sick or bury the dead. Your white men sicken and die in their quarters or on the caravan road, and seldom have Christian burial. With few exceptions, the surgeons of your Majesty's government have been gentlemen of professional ability, devoted to duty, but usually left with few medical stores, and no quarters in which to treat their patients. The African soldiers and laborers of your Majesty's government fare worse than the whites, because they have poorer quarters, quite as bad as those of the natives, and in the sheds, called hospitals, they languish upon a bed of bamboo poles without blankets, pillows, or any food different from that served to them when well, rice and fish. I was anxious to see to what extent the natives had adopted the fostering care of your Majesty's benevolent enterprise, and I was doomed to bitter disappointment. Instead of the natives of the Congo adopting the fostering care of your Majesty's government, they everywhere complain that their land has been taken from them by force, that the government is cruel and arbitrary, and declare that they neither love nor respect the government and its flag. Your Majesty's government has sequestered their land, burned their towns, stolen their property, enslaved their women and children, and committed other crimes too numerous to mention in detail. It is natural that they everywhere shrink from the fostering care your Majesty's government so eagerly proffers them. There has been, to my absolute knowledge, no honest and practical effort made to increase their knowledge and secure their welfare. Your Majesty's government has never spent 1 franc for educational purposes, nor instituted any practical system of industrialism. Indeed, the most unpractical measures have been adopted against the natives in nearly every respect, and in the capital of your Majesty's government at Boma, there is not a native employed. The labor system is radically unpractical. The soldiers and laborers of your Majesty's government are very largely imported from Zanzibar at a cost of £10 per capita, and from Sierra Leone, Liberia, Accra, and Lagos at from £1 to £1 10 shillings per capita. These recruits are transported under circumstances more cruel than cattle in European countries. They eat their rice twice a day by the use of their fingers. They often thirst for water when the season is dry. They are exposed to the heat and rain, and sleep upon the damp and filthy decks of the vessels, often so closely crowded as to lie in human ordure, and of course many die. Upon the arrival of the survivors in the Congo, they are set to work as laborers at 1 shilling a day. As soldiers, they are promised 16 shillings per month, in English money, but are usually paid off in cheap handkerchiefs and poisonous gin. The cruel and unjust treatment to which these people are subjected breaks the spirits of many of them, makes them distrust and despise your Majesty's government. They are enemies, not patriots. There are from 60 to 70 officers of the Belgian army in the service of your Majesty's government in the Congo, of whom only about 30 are at their post. The other half are in Belgium on furlough. These officers draw double pay, as soldiers and as civilians. It is not my duty to criticize the unlawful and unconstitutional use of these officers coming into the service of this African state. Such criticism will come with more grace from some Belgian statesmen, who may remember that there is no constitutional or organic relation subsisting between his government and the purely personal and absolute monarchy your Majesty has established in Africa. But I take the liberty to say that many of these officers are too young and inexperienced to be entrusted with the difficult work of dealing with native races. They are ignorant of native character, lack wisdom, justice, fortitude, and patience. They have estranged the natives from your Majesty's government, have sown the seed of discord between tribes and villages, and some of them have stained the uniform of the Belgian officer with murder, arson, and robbery. Other officers have served the state faithfully and deserve well of their royal master. Of the unwise, complicated, and stupid dual government of the state of Congo, I cannot say much in this letter, reserving space for a careful examination of it in another place. I may say that the usefulness of many a Congo official is neutralized by having to keep a useless set of books. For example, an officer is in command of a station and he wishes to buy 2 eggs. He makes this entry in a ruled and printed book. For nourishment, bought 2 eggs for 2 entaka. In another book he must make this entry, 2 entaka gone out of the store. And in another book he must enter this purchase 7 times. Comment upon such supreme. Folly is unnecessary. We need only feel compassion for the mental condition of the man in Brussels who invented this system, and deep sympathy with its victims in the Congo. From these general observations, I wish now to pass to specific charges against your Majesty's government. First, your Majesty's government is deficient in the moral, military, and financial strength necessary to govern a territory of 1,508,000 square miles, 7,251 miles of navigation, and 31,694 square miles of lake surface. In the lower Congo River, there is but 1 post, in the Cataract Region 1. From Leopoldville to Ngombe, a distance of more than 300 miles, there is not a single soldier or civilian. Not 1 out of every 20 state officials know the language of the natives, although they are constantly issuing laws, difficult even for Europeans, and expect the natives to comprehend and obey them. Cruelties of the most astounding character are practiced by the natives, such as burying slaves alive in the grave of a dead chief, cutting off the heads of captured warriors in native combats, and no effort is put forth by your Majesty's government to prevent them. Between 800 and 1,000 slaves are sold to be eaten by the natives of the Congo state annually, and slave raids, accomplished by the most cruel and murderous agencies, are carried on within the territorial limits of your Majesty's government, which is impotent. There are only 2,300 soldiers in the Congo. Second, your Majesty's government has established nearly 50 posts, consisting of from 2 to 8 mercenary slave soldiers from the East Coast. There is no white commissioned officer at these posts. They are in charge of the black Zanzibar soldiers, and the state expects them not only to sustain themselves, but to raid enough to feed the garrisons where the white men are stationed. These piratical buccaneering posts compel the natives to furnish them with fish, goats, fowls, and vegetables at the mouths of their muskets, and whenever the natives refuse to feed these vampires, they report to the main station, and white officers come with an expeditionary force and burn away the homes of the natives. These black soldiers, many of whom are slaves, exercise the power of life and death. They are ignorant and cruel, because they do not comprehend the natives. They are imposed upon them by the state. They make no report as to the number of robberies they commit, or the number of lives they take. They are only required to subsist upon the natives, and thus relieve your Majesty's government of the cost of feeding them. They are the greatest curse the country suffers now. Third, your Majesty's government is guilty of violating its contracts made with its soldiers, mechanics, and workmen, many of whom are subjects of other governments. Their letters never reach home. Fourth, the courts of your Majesty's government are abortive, unjust, partial, and delinquent. I have personally witnessed and examined their clumsy operations. The laws printed and circulated in Europe for the protection of the blacks in the Congo are a dead letter and a fraud. I have heard an officer of the Belgian army pleading the cause of a white man of low degree who had been guilty of beating and stabbing a black man and urging race distinctions, and prejudices as good and sufficient reasons why his client should be adjudged innocent. I know of prisoners remaining in custody for 6 and 10 months because they were not judged. I saw the white servant of the Governor General, Camille Jansen, detected in stealing a bottle of wine from a hotel table. A few hours later, the Procureur General searched his room and found many more stolen bottles of wine and other things, not the property of servants. No one can be prosecuted in the state of Congo without an order of the Governor General, and as he refused to allow his servant to be arrested, nothing could be done. The black servants in the hotel, where the wine had been stolen, had been often accused and beaten for these thefts, and now they were glad to be vindicated. But to the surprise of every honest man, the thief was sheltered by the Governor General of your Majesty's government. Fifth, your Majesty's government is excessively cruel to its prisoners, condemning them, for the slightest offenses, to the chain gang, the like of which cannot be seen in any other government in the civilized or uncivilized world. Often these ox chains eat into the necks of the prisoners and produce sores about which the flies circle, aggravating the running wound, so the prisoner is constantly worried. These poor creatures are frequently beaten with a dried piece of hippopotamus skin, called a chicote, and usually the blood flows at every stroke when well laid on. But the cruelties visited upon soldiers and workmen are not to be compared with the sufferings of the poor natives who, upon the slightest pretext, are thrust into the wretched prisons here in the upper river. I cannot deal with the dimensions of these prisons in this letter, but will do so in my report to my government. Sixth, women are imported into your Majesty's government for immoral purposes. They are introduced by 2 methods, viz. Black men are dispatched to the Portuguese coast, where they engage these women as mistresses of white men, who pay to the procurer a monthly sum. The other method is by capturing native women and condemning them to 7 years' servitude for some imaginary crime against the state with which the villages of these women are charged. The state then hires these women out to the highest bidder, the officers having the first choice, and then the men, whenever children are born of such relations. The state maintains that the woman being its property, the child belongs to it also. Not long ago, a Belgian trader had a child by a slave woman of the state, and he tried to secure possession of it that he might educate it, but the chief of the station where he resided refused to be moved by his entreaties. At length he appealed to the governor-general, and he gave him the woman, and thus the trader obtained the child also. This was, however, an unusual case of generosity and clemency, and there is only one post that I know of where there is not to be found children of the civil. And military officers of your Majesty's government abandoned to degradation, white men bringing their own flesh and blood under the lash of a most cruel master, the state of Congo. 7th. Your Majesty's government is engaged in trade and commerce, competing with the organized trade companies of Belgium, England, France, Portugal, and Holland. It taxes all trading companies and exempts its own goods from export duty, and makes many of its officers ivory traders, with the promise of a liberal commission upon all they can buy or get for the state. State soldiers patrol many villages, forbidding the natives to trade with any person but a state official. And when the natives refuse to accept the price of the state, their goods are seized by the government that promised them protection. When natives have persisted in trading with the trade companies, the state has punished their independence by burning the villages in the vicinity of the trading houses and driving the natives away. 8th. Your Majesty's government has violated the General Act of the Conference of Berlin by firing upon native canoes, by confiscating the property of natives, by intimidating native traders, and preventing them from trading with white trading companies, by quartering troops in native villages when there is no war, by causing vessels bound from Stanley Pool to Stanley Falls to break their journey and leave the Congo, ascend the Aruwimi River to Basoko to be visited and show their papers, by forbidding a mission steamer to fly its national flag without permission from a local government, by permitting the natives to carry on the slave trade, and by engaging in the wholesale and retail slave trade itself. 9th. Your Majesty's government has been, and is now, guilty of waging unjust and cruel wars against natives, with the hope of securing slaves and women, to minister to the behests of the officers of your government. In such slave-hunting raids, one village is armed by the state against the other, and the force thus secured is incorporated with the regular troops. I have no adequate terms with which to depict to your Majesty the brutal acts of your soldiers upon such raids as these. The soldiers who open the combat are usually the bloodthirsty cannibalistic Bangalas, who give no quarter to the aged grandmother or nursing child at the breast of its mother. There are instances in which they have brought the heads of their victims to their white officers on the expeditionary steamers, and afterwards eaten the bodies of slain children. In one war, 2 Belgian army officers saw, from the deck of their steamer, a native in a canoe some distance away. He was not a combatant, and was ignorant of the conflict in progress upon the shore, some distance away. The officers made a wager of £5 that they could hit the native with their rifles. 3 shots were fired, and the native fell dead, pierced through the head, and the trade canoe was transformed into a funeral barge and floated silently down the river. In another war, waged without just cause, the Belgian army officer in command of your Majesty's forces placed the men in 2 or 3 lines on the steamers, and instructed them to commence firing when the whistles blew. The steamers approached the fated town, and, as was usual with them, the people came to the shore to look at the boats and sell different articles of food. There was a large crowd of men, women, and children, laughing, talking, and exposing their goods for sale. At once the shrill whistles of the steamers were heard. The soldiers leveled their guns and fired, and the people fell dead, and wounded, and groaning, and pleading for mercy. Many prisoners were made, and among them 4 comely-looking young women. And now ensued a most revolting scene, Your Majesty's officers quarreling over the selection of these women. The commander of this murderous expedition, with his garments stained with innocent blood, declared that his rank entitled him to the first choice. Under the direction of this same officer, the prisoners were reduced to servitude, and I saw them working upon the plantation of one of the stations of the state. 10th. Your Majesty's government is engaged in the slave trade, wholesale and retail. It buys and sells and steals slaves. Your Majesty's government gives £3 per head for able-bodied slaves for military service. Officers at the chief stations get the men and receive the money when they are transferred to the state, but there are some middlemen who only get from 20 to 25 francs per head. 316 slaves were sent down the river recently, and others are to follow. These poor natives are sent hundreds of miles away from their villages to serve among other natives whose language they do not know. When these men run away, a reward of 1,000 intaka is offered. Not long ago, such a recaptured slave was given 100 chicote each day until he died. 300 intaka brass rod is the price the state pays for a slave when bought from a native. The labor force at the stations of Your Majesty's government in the upper river is composed of slaves of all ages and both sexes. 11th. Your Majesty's government has concluded a contract with the Arab governor at this place for the establishment of a line of military posts from the 7th Cataract to Lake Tanganyika, a territory to which Your Majesty has no more legal claim than I have to be Commander-in-Chief of the Belgian Army. For this work, the Arab governor is to receive 500 stands of arms, 5,000 kegs of powder, and 20,000 pounds sterling, to be paid in several installments. As I write, the news reaches me that these much treasured and long looked-for materials of war are to be discharged at Basoko, and the resident here is to be given the discretion as to the distribution of them. There is a feeling of deep discontent among the Arabs here, and they seem to feel that they are being trifled with. As to the significance of this move, Europe and America can judge without any comment from me, especially England. 12th. The agents of Your Majesty's government have misrepresented the Congo country and the Congo Railway. Mr. H. M. Stanley, the man who was your chief agent in setting up your authority in this country, has grossly misrepresented the character of the country. Instead of it being fertile and productive, it is sterile and unproductive. The natives can scarcely subsist upon the vegetable life produced in some parts of the country. Nor will this condition of affairs change until the native shall have been taught by the European the dignity, utility, and blessing of labor. There is no improvement among the natives, because there is an impassable gulf between them and Your Majesty's government, a gulf which can never be bridged. Henry M. Stanley's name produces a shudder among this simple folk when mentioned. They remember his broken promises, his copious profanity, his hot temper, his heavy blows, his severe and rigorous measures by which they were mulcted of their lands. His last appearance in the Congo produced a profound sensation among them, when he led 500 Zanzibar soldiers with 300 camp followers on his way to relieve Emin Pasha. They thought it meant complete subjugation, and they fled in confusion. But the only thing they found in the wake of his march was misery. No white man commanded his rear column, and his troops were allowed to straggle, sicken, and die. And their bones were scattered over more than 200 miles of territory. Emigration cannot be invited to this country for many years. The trade of the Upper Congo consists only of ivory and rubber. The first is very old and the latter very poor. If the railway were completed now, it would not be able to earn a dividend for 10 or 12 years. And as I have carefully inspected the line of the proposed road, I give it as my honest judgment that it cannot be completed for 8 years. This is due to the stockholders. They should be undeceived. I am writing a report on the Congo Railway and will not present any data in this letter upon that subject. Conclusions. Against the deceit, fraud, robberies, arson, murder, slave raiding, and general policy of cruelty of your Majesty's government to the natives stands their record of unexampled patience, long-suffering, and forgiving spirit, which put the boasted civilization and professed religion of your Majesty's government to the blush. During 13 years, only one white man has lost his life by the hands of the natives, and only 2 white men have been killed in the Congo. Major Barttelot was shot by a Zanzibar soldier, and the captain of a Belgian trading boat was the victim of his own rash and unjust treatment of a native chief. All the crimes perpetrated in the Congo have been done in your name, and you must answer at the bar of public sentiment for the misgovernment of a people whose lives and fortunes were entrusted to you by the August Conference of Berlin, 1884 to 1885. I now appeal to the powers which committed this infant state to your Majesty's charge, and to the great states which gave it international being, and whose majestic law you have scorned and trampled upon, to call and create an international commission to investigate the charges herein preferred, in the name of humanity, commerce, constitutional government, and Christian civilization. I base this appeal upon the terms of Article 36 of Chapter 7 of the General Act of the Conference of Berlin, in which that august assembly of sovereign states reserved to themselves the right to introduce into it later, and by common accord, the modifications or ameliorations, the utility of which may be demonstrated experience. I appeal to the Belgian people and to their constitutional government, so proud of its traditions, replete with the song and story of its champions of human liberty, and so jealous of its present position in the sisterhood of European states, to cleanse itself from the imputation of the crimes with which your Majesty's personal state of Congo is polluted. I appeal to anti-slavery societies in all parts of Christendom, to philanthropists, Christians, statesmen, and to the great mass of people everywhere, to call upon the governments of Europe to hasten the close of the tragedy your Majesty's unlimited monarchy is enacting in the Congo. I appeal to our Heavenly Father, whose service is perfect love, in witness of the purity of my motives and the integrity of my aims. And to history and mankind, I appeal for the demonstration and vindication of the truthfulness of the charges I have herein briefly outlined. And all this upon the word of honor of a gentleman, I subscribe myself your Majesty's humble and obedient servant. George W. Williams, Stanley Falls, Central Africa, July 18th, 1890. The letter left his hands, but it did not leave his heart. Once it crossed the sea, it carried with it the weight of generations, the cry of the enslaved, the voice of the forgotten, the grief of a continent misnamed. In Europe, silence followed first, the kind of silence that trembles before truth. Leopold's palace received it in secret. The king read it in the stillness of his chamber, and though his lips did not move, his heart clenched. Pride sealed his mouth, but fear entered his court. The words of one black man, one descendant of the enslaved, had pierced the golden armor of a throne. Williams did not know that heaven itself had already taken record. His letter became the seed that would later sprout into the Congo reform movement, the awakening of consciences he would never live to see. But after he sent it, his body began to fade. The same journey that had opened his eyes had also broken his health. By the time he left Africa, fever followed him like a shadow. He tried to find rest in Portugal, but his spirit refused to be still. He had seen too much, felt too deeply, carried too long. Even as his strength failed, he continued to write essays, reflections, unfinished notes. He spoke not of fame or recognition, but of redemption. He wanted the world to understand that Africa was not darkness, it was memory, the first light of humanity, dimmed by greed but never extinguished. And when the fever finally took him in Lisbon, 1891, he was only 41 years old. He died far from home, without wealth, without applause, but not without purpose. For what is a man's life if not the echo he leaves in the hearts of the living? And his echo was mighty. It would take years, decades, for the world to realize that his letter was prophecy. The photographs that later emerged, the reports that followed, the cries that reached the ears of Europe, all of it was the world catching up to what Allah had already shown him. He walked the earth as a witness, spoke as a vessel, and departed as a martyr of truth. His death was not defeat, it was fulfillment. He had done what Allah sent him to do, to speak when the world was deaf, and to write when silence was sin. And so we must remember George Washington Williams, not just as a soldier alone, nor as a scholar, but as a man whom Allah entrusted with the pen of justice. His body was buried in foreign soil, but his spirit returned to its origin, to the same divine source that had breathed purpose into him from the beginning. Because the truth does not die with the one who speaks it. It multiplies until even empires must bow before it. He was one man with a pen, but Allah made that pen strike harder than any sword. In a century where silence was safer than honesty, he chose truth, and truth chose him back. From the battlefields of America to the heart of Africa, his life was a single verse written by the divine. Stand for justice, even if it is against yourself. He stood, and in standing, he became more than a man. He became a witness. Williams didn't free nations with armies. He freed conscience with words. He stood before kings without a crown, spoke against empires without an army, and died without glory or riches. Yet his voice still echoes, carried not by newspapers or monuments, but by souls that recognize sincerity when they hear it. He was buried on foreign soil, but his spirit rests in the continent that called him home. Between Africa and America, he became a bridge, not of ships or trade, but of remembrance. His letter was not just written to Leopold, it was written to the world, and to us. A reminder that history is not made by power, but by purpose. Allah preserved his name because it was spoken in truth. And now, when the descendants of the enslaved remember Congo, they will also remember the man who wrote so that the world could no longer pretend not to see. He fulfilled his decree. His body returned to dust, but his duty was completed, for Allah does not forget the witnesses he sends. History often pretends to move by accident, but Allah writes nothing by chance. He aligns souls across continents and centuries, not to collide, but to reveal truth through contrast. And so came three men, born under different suns, walking the same path for three different reasons. The first, Stanley, walked with ambition burning brighter than his conscience. He sought glory and discovery, believing he was mapping the unknown. Yet what he truly uncovered was the corruption of the human soul. His hands opened rivers, but his heart closed to mercy. He was the seeker who found everything except himself. The second, Leopold, never set foot on the land he ruled, yet drenched it in blood. He called himself a benefactor, but his crown became an idol of greed. He traded salvation for empire, disguising hunger as holiness. He was the king who wanted God's crown, a man who mistook dominion for divinity. And then came Williams, the witness Allah raised among them. He did not come with armies or thrones, but with a soul refined by truth. He fought for the enslaved, bled for the forgotten, and spoke for the voiceless. Where one deceived and the other destroyed, he wrote. And through his writing, Allah delivered judgment. Each fulfilled a decree. one to reveal human arrogance, one to expose its consequences, and one to restore the balance through witness. Together they form a triangle of divine design, a map not of geography, but of morality. Stanley, the hand that opened the wound. Leopold, the mind that deepened it. Williams, the heart that tried to heal it. And just as the Quran says, and we alternate these days among the people so that Allah may make evident those who believe. 3:140. So too did these men become signs, proof that even in an age of deception, Allah allows truth to rise through those He chooses. They were not equals, but instruments of a single decree, that no lie, no empire, no cruelty escapes divine remembrance. Their names, though written by men, were arranged by God, and through their collision, the world saw both the depths of its darkness and the brilliance of a single light, the light of a man who carried his people's pain as proof that Allah still sees the oppressed,